For years, my life felt like a beautiful, uninterrupted dream. My husband and I had built a life together that I thought was full of love, understanding, and mutual respect. We had a beautiful home in the suburbs, 2 wonderful children, and what seemed like the perfect family dynamic. We spent weekends together, often with family outings or quiet nights in, laughing and chatting over dinner. I had always believed in the idea of true love and was certain that the life we shared was exactly what I had hoped for when I dreamed about my future. Our marriage felt like the rock-solid foundation that everything else in my life rested on. We were a team, working side by side through all the challenges that came our way. My husband's career was thriving, and I had always supported him wholeheartedly, putting my own aspirations on the back burner to help him succeed. Our relationship felt balanced. There were the usual ups and downs, of course, but nothing that made me doubt the strength of our bond. Our home was filled with laughter, joy, and love, or so I thought. Then, one day, everything changed in an instant. My world turned upside down when my husband sat me down and dropped a bombshell. He wanted a divorce. It felt as if the floor had just opened beneath me, and suddenly, everything that had once seemed so secure was shattered. I remember the exact moment he said it, how the words hung in the air like a dark cloud that I couldn't escape. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. It was as if he had simply come to a calm, rational decision and felt no need to explain himself further. "I think we need to separate," he said. "I don't want to be married anymore." I sat there, stunned, unable to form a single coherent thought. Divorce wasn't something I had ever considered, let alone imagined. Sure, we had our disagreements, like any couple, but we had always worked through them. So this sudden declaration, without any warning or attempt at discussion, left me reeling. I could hardly breathe, let alone think straight. The man I thought I knew, the man I had devoted myself to, was now asking me to walk away from everything we had built. In the days that followed, the shock wore off and was replaced by an overwhelming mix of emotions: anger, confusion, sadness. It felt like betrayal, a sharp stab in the heart. I couldn't understand what had happened or why he hadn't given me a chance to work through whatever issues we were facing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how blindsided I had been. For years, I had supported him and our family, prioritizing his needs over my own. How could he just throw it all away without a second thought? My mind spun in circles as I tried to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. I had been a good wife, a good partner, and yet here I was facing the end of my marriage without any preparation, no warning signs, nothing. The shock of his words left me paralyzed. I walked around in a daze for days, barely able to function, consumed by the thought that everything I had believed in, everything I had built, was now in jeopardy. I kept asking myself, what went wrong? What did I miss? It felt like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. My heart ached with every breath I took. I could no longer see the future I had imagined for myself and our family. The thought of no longer being a part of his life, no longer sharing a home with him, was unfathomable. I had invested so much of myself into this marriage, and it felt like it had all been for nothing. I had tried so hard to be everything he needed, and yet it wasn't enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed, and worse, that he had simply moved on without any emotional turmoil. At the same time, there was a part of me that was trying to be logical, trying to figure out the next steps. But the confusion was overwhelming. I felt betrayed by the very person I thought I could trust the most. The man who had once promised to love me for better or worse was now pulling away from me without a second thought. The man who had been my partner, my confidant, was now a stranger. I found myself crying in private, not knowing how to process the emotions flooding through me. I had no idea what to do next. Everything felt uncertain, and the future seemed like a dark void. For a while, I allowed myself to wallow in the pain, not knowing how to escape the emotional weight that threatened to crush me. In the midst of the heartbreak, something inside me snapped. The emotional weight was unbearable, but I knew I couldn't let it consume me entirely. My children needed me, and I couldn't afford to break down and lose myself in this whirlwind of grief. I had always been someone who handled challenges head-on, and now, more than ever, I had to take control of my life. I started thinking about the practical side of things. What was going to happen to our house, the cars, the savings? What was I entitled to? I had supported my husband for years, sacrificed my own career to help him climb the ladder of success, and I wasn't going to walk away empty-handed. This wasn't just about emotions anymore. It was about survival. I had to protect myself and my children, and I couldn't afford to be sentimental. I started making calls to lawyers, scheduling consultations, and taking the first steps toward understanding my rights. The more I delved into the legal side of things, the clearer it became to me that I had worked hard for everything we had. The house, the cars, the savings. Everything was tied up in the work we had done together as a family. But in this moment, it was mine to claim. The divorce wasn't just an emotional decision. It was a financial one, too. I had to ensure that I was going to be okay after all of this. No one could make me feel guilty for wanting what I was entitled to. In the past, I might have thought about doing things nicely or peacefully, but now I was determined. I was not going to let the years I spent in this marriage go to waste. As soon as I made the decision to start taking legal action, I dove into the details. I sat down with a lawyer and began to go over everything. Property rights, asset division, custody arrangements, alimony, everything. I felt a mix of emotions, fear, excitement, and empowerment all at once. I had never imagined myself in a position where I would have to fight for what was mine, but here I was. The lawyer was kind and patient, explaining everything to me step by step. He made it clear that since we didn't have a prenuptial agreement, I had every right to claim a fair share of everything we had built together. The house, the cars, the joint savings account, everything was up for discussion. I wasn't just some passive party in this divorce. I was entitled to a portion of everything. My mind raced as I thought about how much I had contributed to the marriage, to the family. I had worked side by side with him, supporting him emotionally and financially, while also sacrificing my own career and personal dreams. I had put in so much effort to make sure our family had everything we needed. It wasn't just about the money, it was about recognition. I had given so much of myself, and now, as much as it hurt, I had to think about what was best for me and the kids. I started organizing all our financial documents, jotting down everything I could remember about our assets. It was like I was preparing for battle, but this wasn't a fight for revenge. It was a fight for survival. When my husband and I got married, we had never considered a prenuptial agreement. At the time, we were young, in love, and naive, believing that divorce was something that only happened to other people. We never thought our marriage would end, so we never discussed protecting our assets. I often wondered if he had ever thought about it, but that seemed irrelevant now. The fact was there was no prenuptial agreement, and that meant everything we had earned during our marriage was fair game. His savings, our home, the cars, everything had to be divided. As painful as it was to think about, I now realized that there were no rules governing what we could take or leave behind. The law was the only thing that mattered now, and I had to ensure I walked away with my fair share. The more I spoke with my attorney, the more I realized how much I had a right to. The thought of walking away without a fight seemed impossible. I had dedicated so much of my life to this marriage, and now, as the ground shifted beneath me, I couldn't let the years of hard work slip away. It wasn't about greed. It was about what was fair. I was determined to get what I was owed, not just for me, but for my children. I couldn't risk their futures, their security, on the whims of a man who had suddenly decided to check out of our life together. I had a responsibility to them, and I was going to fight for it. When the divorce discussions began, I knew immediately what I wanted. It wasn't just about the material things. It was about the life we had built together and the sacrifices I had made. The house we had bought together was not just a piece of property to me. It was the home where I had raised our children, the place where I had invested so much emotional energy. The cars, while they were just things, represented a part of our success, our journey. And his savings? That was something I felt I was entitled to. I had helped him build that nest egg, and I wasn't about to let him walk away with everything while I started from scratch. I wasn't asking for all of it. I just wanted what was fair. My lawyer helped me draft the initial settlement proposal, which included the house, the cars, and half of his savings. It wasn't an aggressive move. It was simply a fair one. I wanted to show my husband that I wasn't going to sit idly by and let him dictate the terms of our future. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I also knew it was what I deserved. There were many things I could have asked for, but I focused on what was most important, securing a stable future for myself and the children. My husband, on the other hand, seemed taken aback by my firm stance. I could tell that he expected me to fold, to back down, but I was done being the passive partner in this marriage. I was in control now. When my husband first saw the settlement proposal, his face turned pale with shock. He wasn't expecting me to come out with such a firm stance. For years, I had been the one to support him, the one to help him with everything, and now, suddenly, I I was demanding what was rightfully mine. He tried to downplay it, suggesting that I was overreacting, that we could come to a more reasonable agreement. His defense was thin, and he seemed almost desperate to avoid giving up too much. I could see through his attempts to negotiate, trying to undermine my requests. He suggested that we could simply sell the house and split the proceeds, or that we could take a more amicable approach. But his words felt empty. I had been more than amicable for years, and it had gotten me nowhere. At one point, he even suggested that we could work out a deal where I could keep the house, but he'd take the cars and the savings. He tried to paint the situation as if he was being generous, but all I felt was manipulation. He knew how much the house meant to me, how much emotional investment I had in it. I wasn't about to back down now. If he thought I was going to accept a deal that left me with less than what I deserved, he was sorely mistaken. I realized in that moment that he didn't see the situation the way I did. To him, it was a transaction. To me, it was about getting the closure I needed, securing a future for myself and the kids, and reclaiming my dignity. I wasn't going to let him dictate my worth anymore. As the negotiations began to intensify, I turned to my lawyer for advice. I felt a mix of doubt and fear creeping in. What if I was asking for too much? What if I couldn't get what I wanted? But my lawyer was adamant that I shouldn't settle for less than I was entitled to. This is your life, and you have worked hard for everything you have. Don't let him talk you out of it, she said firmly. Her words gave me the strength I needed. She explained that his attempts at negotiating were simply tactics to wear me down and get me to accept less than I deserved. She reminded me that the house, the cars, and his savings were all rightfully mine to claim, given my years of supporting him and our family. My lawyer reassured me that this was a standard settlement and that I had every right to demand what I was asking for. I was nervous, but hearing those words from someone who knew the law and had seen cases like mine before gave me the confidence to stand my ground. The next time my husband tried to bring up a lower offer, I was ready. I looked him in the eyes and said, "This is non-negotiable. I'm not going to settle for less. I've earned this." It felt empowering to assert myself like that. For once, I wasn't the one trying to make peace or avoid conflict. I was standing up for myself, for my children, and for everything I had worked so hard to build. The sense of control was both terrifying and liberating. But in that moment, I knew it was the right thing to do. As the divorce proceedings wore on, the tension between my husband and me grew palpable. He seemed to take my demands as a personal attack, almost as if I were trying to punish him. His frustration became evident in the way he spoke to me, his words sharp and his tone condescending. "Do you really think you deserve all of that?" he snapped one evening, after I rejected yet another of his lower offers. "You didn't even work for it. I was the one who earned the money. Why are you doing this?" His words stung, but I refused to let them weaken me. I had worked just as hard as he had, maybe in different ways, but that didn't make me any less deserving. I saw through his frustration. It wasn't about the money or the house, it was about control. He was losing control of the situation, and that scared him. He had always been the one to call the shots in our marriage, but now the tables had turned. His anger wasn't about what I was asking for, it was about his own vulnerability. I had to remind myself that this was his problem to deal with, not mine. I wasn't asking for revenge, but for fairness. If he truly wanted to walk away, then he needed to understand that there would be consequences. I wasn't going to sit back and let him walk all over me, no matter how much he tried to guilt-trip me into doing so. I had to protect myself, and I was ready for the fight. As the days dragged on, I began to feel the emotional weight of the situation. Divorce wasn't just a legal process, it was a deeply emotional one. The constant back and forth, the endless negotiations, the stress of it all began to wear on me. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Was I being too harsh? Was I asking for too much? It was hard to silence the doubts that crept into my mind. But then I would remind myself of everything that had brought me here. The years of sacrifice, the emotional toll of being in a relationship where I had put his needs before my own. I realized that, despite the pain it caused, I had to do this for my own well-being. I wasn't just fighting for material possessions. I was fighting for my own sense of self-worth. I had spent so many years putting him and our family first that I had forgotten to prioritize myself. I had lost sight of who I was outside of my role as his wife and the mother of our children. This divorce, painful as it was an opportunity for me to rediscover myself, to stand up for myself, and to take back control of my future. I had to keep reminding myself of this truth as the emotional strain of the situation began to take its toll. It wasn't easy, but every step I took in this process was a step toward reclaiming my power, and that kept me going. As the weeks passed, I began to look at the divorce in a new light. What had started as an emotional roller coaster of pain and anger slowly began to feel like an opportunity for growth. Yes, the end of my marriage was devastating, but it also marked the beginning of something new for me, something I had never allowed myself to consider before. Divorce wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. I had spent so many years living in the shadow of my marriage, making sacrifices, and putting my needs aside. Now, I had the chance to focus on myself, on what I wanted and needed. The more I thought about it, the more liberating the idea became. I could create a new life for myself, one where I didn't have to answer to anyone. I could pursue the things I had once put on hold, my career, my passions, my dreams. I had spent so much of my life building someone else's future, but now it was my turn. The freedom to do things on my terms, to create a life that was truly mine, felt exhilarating. Yes, there were still challenges ahead: custody arrangements, financial struggles, and the emotional scars of the divorce. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had the power to rebuild my life the way I wanted. As the divorce proceedings continued, my husband seemed to become more desperate and bitter. His strategies shifted from negotiation to guilt-tripping. He would often call or text me, trying to make me feel like I was doing something wrong. "You're ruining my life," he would say. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? Do you think the kids are going to be happy when they see us tearing each other apart?" At first, I almost felt guilty. The weight of his words hung heavily on my heart, and I questioned whether I was being too harsh. But then I took a step back and realized what he was trying to do. This wasn't about the kids or our life together. It was about his fear of losing everything, and he was willing to manipulate me to try to avoid it. I had spent years trying to keep the peace in our relationship, and I had become too accustomed to carrying the emotional burden. But I couldn't let his words control me anymore. Yes, the divorce was hard on everyone, especially the kids. But I wasn't the one who had decided to break the family apart. He was. I had done everything I could to hold things together, but it was clear that the emotional toll on both of us had become unbearable. I had to remind myself that this was his decision, not mine. The guilt trip tactics weren't going to work. I wasn't out to destroy his life. I was out to rebuild mine. The emotional weight of the divorce process was exhausting, but I didn't have to go through it alone. My friends and family rallied around me, offering unwavering support. There were moments when I felt like I couldn't go on, when the burden of the situation felt too much to bear. But every time I called a friend or sat down with my sister, I felt the weight lift just a little bit. They reminded me of my strength, of all the things I had accomplished before and all the things I still had the power to achieve. Their belief in me helped me see beyond the immediate pain and frustration of the divorce. I realized that I wasn't isolated in this journey. I had a strong support system that believed in me, and that belief helped propel me forward. One of the most empowering moments came when a close friend of mine, who had gone through a similar divorce, shared her story with me. She told me how difficult the process had been, but how much stronger she was on the other side. Her words were a turning point for me. I realized that, while the divorce was painful, it was also an opportunity for me to grow and to finally take control of my life. Hearing her story gave me the courage to keep pushing forward. I wasn't just surviving, I was starting to thrive. The support of my loved ones, coupled with the realization that I wasn't alone, was all I needed to find my inner strength. As the divorce continued to unfold, I began to realize the weight of the responsibility I had taken on. Not only was I dealing with the emotional toll of ending my marriage, but I was also responsible for everything now: finances, parenting, managing the house. There were days when I felt completely overwhelmed, when the idea of doing it all on my own seemed impossible. I had always shared these responsibilities with my husband, and suddenly, it was all on me. I had to make decisions about our children's future, manage our finances, and take care of everything else. It was exhausting. I would lie awake at night, wondering if I was doing enough, if I was making the right choices. But even in the face of all this pressure, I realized something important. I was doing it. I was handling everything, and I wasn't failing. What I had once thought was an insurmountable task was now just part of my new reality. Yes, it was hard, and yes, there were moments when I wanted to give up, but the resilience I had developed over the years, living with someone who didn't always understand me, who didn't always appreciate what I brought to the table, had made me stronger than I realized. Every time I got through a challenge, whether it was managing the bills or comforting the kids, I felt a little more confident. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming the woman I had always wanted to be. The responsibility was mine, but so was the strength to carry it. The house had been my home for so many years. It was where we had built our life together, where our children had grown up, and where we had celebrated countless milestones. Letting go of it felt like an impossible decision. But deep down, I knew that holding on to the house wasn't going to help me heal. It was just tying me to the past. The memories, both good and bad, were suffocating me. I realized that I couldn't move forward while clinging to the past. It was time to sell the house. The process was emotional. As I walked through the empty rooms, I found myself flooded with memories of birthdays, anniversaries, and family dinners. But I also remembered the fights, the disappointments, and the loneliness I had often felt. I knew that selling the house was the right thing to do, but it didn't make it any easier. When the house finally sold, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. It was a chapter closing, but it was also a sign that I was moving on. I was no longer bound by the expectations of my past, and that felt liberating. I could finally begin to create a new space for myself, one that was entirely mine, free from the weight of memories that no longer served me. After everything that had happened, I realized I needed a break, something to help me reconnect with myself, to find peace amid the chaos of the divorce. I decided to take a vacation, just for me. No responsibilities, no expectations, just a chance to recharge. I chose a quiet beach destination, far away from the noise of daily life. It was exactly what I needed. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the warm sun on my skin, and the solitude helped me reset my mind and soul. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to answer to anyone. I could simply be. During my vacation, I spent time reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about the woman I had been before the marriage, before the kids, and before the responsibilities that had defined me. I realized that I had lost touch with that woman. The time alone allowed me to rediscover her, to remember the dreams and passions I had once held dear. I had been so caught up in everyone else's needs that I had forgotten about my own. But now I was reclaiming my life, and it felt wonderful. I returned from the vacation with a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. I wasn't just starting over. I was building something new, something better. Throughout the divorce, I had been worried about how it would affect the kids. I didn't want them to feel like they were losing something irreplaceable. I had always tried to shield them from the turmoil between their father and me, but it was impossible to keep everything hidden. Their emotions were raw, just like mine. I noticed them acting out more, especially my eldest. The sadness in their eyes was a reflection of the pain I was feeling too. But instead of letting it break me, I realized that this was an opportunity for me to teach them something crucial. That life doesn't always go the way we plan, but we have the power to rise above it. Over time, I saw my kids begin to adapt. They were stronger than I had given them credit for. They supported me just as much as I supported them. My daughter began asking more questions about how I was feeling, and my son started expressing his concerns in ways I hadn't expected. I saw them begin to understand resilience, not just because I was telling them, but because they were living it. It made me realize that I wasn't just fighting for my own future anymore. I was fighting for theirs too. They needed to see me be strong, to see that even when life is tough, we keep going. As their mother, I knew that I had to set the example. And in doing so, I was teaching them the most valuable lesson I could ever give them: how to weather life's storms with grace and strength. I had always hoped that, in the end, we would be able to co-parent effectively, putting the children's well-being above everything else. But as the divorce progressed, my husband began using the kids as pawns, manipulating them against me in ways I never imagined. He would tell them things like, "Your mom doesn't care about this family anymore," or "She's taking everything and leaving us with nothing." The hurt in my children's eyes when they repeated these words was unbearable. I never wanted to involve them in our issues, but now they were feeling the brunt of his bitterness. I could see the conflict in them as they tried to navigate between loyalty to their father and love for me. At first, I was devastated. The idea that my children were being pulled into this mess was beyond painful. But I quickly realized that this manipulation was a reflection of his desperation, not their truth. I needed to remain calm, to be the anchor that they could rely on, no matter what he said. I reassured them every day that I loved them, that they were my top priority, and that none of this was their fault. Slowly but surely, the kids began to see through the manipulation. They realized that the arguments and bitterness were not about them, but about issues between their father and me. And while it didn't erase the pain, it did create a sense of clarity. I vowed to always be honest with them, to provide a stable, loving environment where they could heal. One of the hardest parts of the divorce was the financial uncertainty. My husband had always been the one who handled the money, and I had become accustomed to relying on him for financial support. But now that everything was in my hands, I felt a deep fear. What if I wasn't capable of managing everything? What if I failed? But with each passing day, I started to educate myself on financial matters. I read books, took online courses, and reached out to financial advisors. It wasn't easy, but the more I learned, the more empowered I felt. I realized that I had the ability to take control of my financial future. I began budgeting carefully, cutting unnecessary expenses, and making smarter investments. Slowly, I started to rebuild my savings. I made sure that I was planning for the long term, not just for the immediate future. As I gained confidence in my financial decisions, I also started to see the potential for growth. I was no longer dependent on anyone else to secure my financial stability. I was doing it myself. This was one of the most liberating feelings of all. I had the ability to shape my own future, and I didn't need anyone's approval to do so. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my sense of agency and control. As I grew more confident in my independence, I started to notice that people were paying more attention to me. Friends and acquaintances began commenting on how different I seemed, stronger, more self-assured, and more at peace. I couldn't deny that I was changing. I felt more comfortable in my own skin, and for the first time in years, I was genuinely happy with who I was becoming. But with this newfound confidence came a temptation that I hadn't anticipated: dating. I began to notice men showing interest in me again. It was flattering, but also overwhelming. After years of being in a marriage where I had given so much of myself away, I wasn't sure I was ready to give up that independence. Part of me longed for companionship, for someone to share my life with again, but another part of me was afraid. The idea of getting into another relationship so soon felt risky. I had spent so many years losing myself in a marriage that no longer served me. I didn't want to fall into that trap again. So instead of rushing into anything, I took my time. I spent more time on self-care, focusing on the things that truly brought me joy, whether it was reading, exercising, or simply being with my kids. I wasn't in a rush to fill the empty space in my life. If anything, I had learned the value of taking it slow, of being content with myself first. I wasn't looking for validation from anyone else anymore. One of the most surprising things that happened during this time of personal growth was rediscovering parts of myself that I had long forgotten. When I had been married, I had let go of many of my hobbies and passions in order to prioritize my husband and children. I had once loved painting, photography, and hiking, but over the years, those things became distant memories. Now, with the divorce final and my life beginning to settle, I found myself with more free time than I had ever had before. At first, it felt strange to be alone with my thoughts, but soon, I began to reconnect with the things I had once loved. I pulled out my old paintbrushes and started creating again. I spent weekends exploring nature trails, taking pictures of the world around me. These small, seemingly insignificant activities helped me feel whole again. I realized how much I had sacrificed for the sake of my marriage, and how much of myself I had lost in the process. Slowly, these creative outlets brought me back to life. The act of painting a canvas or capturing a beautiful sunset with my camera was a form of healing for me. It wasn't just about the art. It was about reclaiming my identity, about finding joy in the simple things again. For the first time in years, I was doing something purely for myself, and it felt incredible. One day, out of the blue, my husband called. The tone in his voice was different, softer, almost regretful. He apologized for the way things had ended between us, for the manipulation, the hurt, and the way he had treated me during the divorce. He said that he had been selfish and didn't fully understand the impact of his actions on our family. For a moment, I found myself sitting there, stunned by the words I had been waiting to hear for so long. I had spent years hoping for an apology like this, thinking that it would bring some sort of closure. But as I listened to him, something didn't sit right. It didn't feel real. The apology felt hollow, like he was saying the words he thought I wanted to hear, not because he genuinely understood the pain he had caused. I could tell there was no real accountability in his voice, No acknowledgement of how deeply he had hurt me, how he had shattered our family. Instead, it felt like he was trying to ease his own guilt, to absolve himself of responsibility. I realized that his apology was more about his need for peace of mind than about making things right. I thanked him for the apology, but deep down, I knew it didn't change anything. It was too little too late. I had already moved on. The damage was done, and the emotional scars were something he couldn't heal with just a few words. There was a time, before the divorce, when I feared being alone. I had convinced myself that my identity was tied to my marriage, that I needed someone by my side to feel complete. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months after the divorce, I began to feel something completely unexpected: freedom. It was as if a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted off my shoulders. I could go wherever I wanted, do whatever I pleased, without consulting anyone. I could make decisions for myself, without having to compromise or consider someone else's feelings. The simplicity of it all was overwhelming in the best possible way. I started embracing this newfound freedom with enthusiasm. I planned spontaneous trips, spent weekends doing things I loved without any guilt or second thoughts. I realized that I had spent years sacrificing my happiness for the sake of keeping a relationship intact, and now, for the first time in a long while, I was living for me. I could choose how I spent my time, who I spent it with, and how I wanted my life to unfold. This freedom was not just a luxury, it was a gift, one that I had earned. And the more I reveled in it, the more I understood that I didn't need a partner to feel whole. I was perfectly capable of thriving on my own, and that realization brought me a sense of peace I hadn't expected. As my life began to improve, something else started to happen. My ex-husband, who had once been the person I leaned on, started to show signs of resentment. He didn't take the divorce well, but I never expected him to act the way he did after everything was finalized. He seemed angry whenever we spoke, as if my success, my newfound confidence, was a direct challenge to him. He would make snide comments about my financial independence or how I was living the good life, while he was left to pick up the pieces. It was clear that he couldn't handle seeing me thrive without him. It was as if my progress was a reminder of his failure to make things work. At first, I didn't know how to respond to his bitterness. I wanted to say something, to explain that I wasn't rubbing it in his face, but the truth was, I wasn't responsible for his unhappiness. I had worked hard to get where I was, to create a new life for myself, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. So, instead of letting his negativity affect me, I chose to remain calm. I limited our interactions and focused on keeping my peace. I knew that his bitterness wasn't about me. It was about his own struggles. But it wasn't my job to carry his emotional baggage anymore. I had done enough of that during our marriage. Now, I was putting myself first. After some time, I began to open my heart to the idea of dating again. At first, I was hesitant. The thought of letting someone else into my life, after everything I had gone through, felt daunting. But slowly, I began meeting people. At first, it felt like a breath of fresh air, someone to talk to connect with. But every time I got close to someone, a nagging voice in the back of my mind reminded me of the betrayal I had suffered. My ex-husband's actions had left scars that I wasn't sure could ever fully heal. The idea of letting someone get that close again was terrifying. What if they hurt me like he did? What if I was just setting myself up for another failure? The more I dated, the more I realized that I wasn't just afraid of being alone. I was afraid of trusting someone again. Every time I looked into someone's eyes, I wondered if they had hidden intentions, if they were capable of the same cruelty my ex had shown. It was hard to separate those feelings of fear from the reality of the new people I was meeting. I knew that I couldn't let my past dictate my future, but the scars were there. It would take time to rebuild that trust, to believe that not everyone was capable of causing the kind of pain I had experienced. And so, I took things slow, making sure that I wasn't rushing into anything out of loneliness. I wasn't going to let my fear rob me of the chance to find happiness again, but I was going to be cautious this time around. With every passing day, I came to a realization that I never thought I would. Not all relationships are meant to last forever, and that's okay. For the longest time, I had held on to the idea that marriage was something that had to last until death. I had believed that the vows I took were sacred and unbreakable. But as I looked back on my marriage, I saw that it had run its course. We had changed in ways that were irreparable. It wasn't anyone's fault, it was just life. Not every relationship is meant to stand the test of time, and that's a painful but liberating truth. Once I accepted this, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I stopped blaming myself for the end of my marriage. I stopped questioning if I could have done something differently. The truth was that we had both contributed to the breakdown of the relationship, and sometimes two people simply aren't meant to stay together. Letting go of this idealized version of what a relationship should be allowed me to embrace the reality of what had happened. I could finally start healing. I could let go of the past and focus on building a future where I wasn't defined by a failed marriage, but by the strength I had gained from it. After the divorce, I found myself in a place I had never been before, alone but not lonely. It was strange at first, not having someone constantly by my side. But then, I started realizing that I had never really taken the time to know who I was outside of my relationship. For years, I had poured myself into my marriage, into making my husband happy, into keeping everything together. I had neglected my own needs, my own dreams. Now, for the first time, I had the space to focus on me. I started reading books, picking up old hobbies I had long forgotten, and exploring new passions I never had the chance to discover before. Through this journey, I learned the most valuable lesson: self-love. I had spent so much time seeking validation from others, especially from my husband, that I had forgotten how to validate myself. It wasn't about being perfect or always having everything figured out. It was about accepting myself, flaws and all. I learned to appreciate my own worth, my own strength, and my own ability to thrive on my own. I no longer needed someone else to define who I was. This self-love became my foundation. It allowed me to set healthy boundaries, to know what I deserved in future relationships, and to trust that I could stand on my own 2 feet, no matter what. For years, I had been so consumed by my marriage that I lost touch with the people who had once meant so much to me, my friends. After the divorce, I realized just how much I had isolated myself. I reached out to a few old friends, feeling a mix of hesitation and hope. To my surprise, they welcomed me back with open arms. They had always been there, waiting for me to return, even if I didn't realize it at the time. These were the people who knew me before I was defined by a relationship, before I was consumed by the need to please someone else. Reconnecting with them was like a breath of fresh air. As I spent more time with my friends, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. They helped me rediscover pieces of myself that I had forgotten, and they reminded me that I didn't have to go through life alone. Their support was invaluable, not just in the immediate aftermath of my divorce, but in the healing process that followed. They listened when I needed to vent, celebrated my victories, and helped me pick up the pieces when I stumbled. I realized how much strength there was in having a strong support system, a group of people who truly cared for me, not because I was someone's wife, but because I was me. And with their love and encouragement, I felt stronger than ever. It was a random afternoon, nothing particularly special about it. But as I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I had a moment of clarity. Everything I had been through, the pain, the heartache, the struggle, it all hit me at once. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't consumed by the weight of it all. I realized just how far I had come. I wasn't the same person I had been when my husband left me. I was stronger, more self-assured, more independent. I had faced my fears, fought my demons, and come out the other side. It wasn't easy, and it certainly hadn't been a smooth ride, but I had done it. That moment of realization hit me like a wave. I had come to understand that I wasn't defined by my marriage or the divorce. I wasn't a victim of my circumstances. I was a survivor, a woman who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. And that gave me a sense of pride I had never felt before. I wasn't just healing from the past, I was thriving in the present. I had learned to trust myself, to trust the journey, and to embrace the unknown. The woman I had become was someone I could finally be proud of. And in that moment, I made a vow to myself that I would never settle for less than what I deserved again. As I look back on my marriage, I realized that while it was painful, it wasn't all for nothing. There were lessons in the heartbreak, in the moments of betrayal, and in the struggles that followed. I had learned about my own resilience, about the strength that I didn't know I possessed. When I first found out about my husband's request for a divorce, I thought it would break me. I didn't know how I would survive the emotional turmoil, the financial challenges, and the feeling of being completely unmoored. But somehow I did. I not only survived, I thrived. What I learned was that adversity doesn't just break you. It has the power to build you up. It forces you to dig deep, to confront parts of yourself that you may not have wanted to face. And in that process, you discover an inner strength that you never knew existed. My marriage, despite all its flaws, had given me the opportunity to grow, to become more self-aware, and to learn how to take control of my own destiny. I will always carry the scars of that relationship, but I no longer see them as weaknesses. They are symbols of my strength, of my ability to rise above the challenges life throws at me. And for that, I will always be grateful. For the longest time, I had lived my life in the shadow of my past, under the weight of my marriage and the subsequent divorce. My identity had been shaped by the highs and lows of that relationship, and it often felt like my past was dictating my present. But as time went on, I realized that I was the one who held the pen. I was the author of my own story, and I didn't need to be defined by what had happened before. The decisions I made, the life I chose to live, were entirely up to me. The past no longer had control over me. I had the power to create the future I wanted. This realization brought me a profound sense of peace. I no longer felt bound by the mistakes or regrets of my past. I understood that every chapter of my life, no matter how difficult, had led me to this point, the person I was today. And I was proud of that person. I knew that I had the strength to overcome anything that life threw my way, and that knowledge gave me a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. I wasn't living for anyone else's expectations anymore. I was living for me, and that made all the difference. After the divorce, I realized that I had been so absorbed in my marriage that I hadn't taken the time to think about my career or professional goals. For the first time, I was free to choose what I wanted to do with my life, without being confined by someone else's expectations. I had always loved writing, but I had never pursued it seriously. Now, with the space and time to focus on myself, I decided to take the leap. I started writing for a few freelance platforms, creating content on topics that truly excited me. It wasn't easy at first, and there were moments of self-doubt, but I pushed through. The beauty of it was that I wasn't doing this for anyone else. I was doing it for me, for my own growth, my own fulfillment. Slowly but surely, I began to build a reputation as a writer. I found clients who valued my work, and with each project, my confidence grew. I was amazed at how much I could accomplish when I was fully in charge of my own life. Embracing my independence wasn't just about financial freedom. It was about owning my choices, following my passion, and carving out a path that was uniquely mine. I was no longer bound by the idea of what I should be doing. I was creating a life that reflected who I truly was. Traveling had always been something I enjoyed, but I had always done it with my husband by my side. There was something comforting about having a partner to share those experiences with. But after the divorce, I felt an urge to do something that would push me out of my comfort zone. I decided to take my first solo trip. At first, I was nervous. Traveling alone felt like a huge step. But as I packed my bags and boarded the plane, I felt a sense of excitement that I hadn't anticipated. It was the first time I was truly doing something for myself, without worrying about anyone else's preferences or comfort. The trip was transformative. I explored new cities, met interesting people, and pushed myself in ways I hadn't thought possible. I learned how to navigate unfamiliar places, how to trust my instincts, and how to rely on my own strength. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments when I felt lonely or unsure of myself. But every time I overcame a challenge, whether it was figuring out the local transportation system or finding the courage to strike up a conversation with a stranger, I felt a surge of pride. By the time I returned home, I felt like a completely different person. I had discovered the joy of self-sufficiency and independence in a way I hadn't expected, and it left me feeling more empowered than ever. As time went on, I began to realize that I was ready to open my heart again. It wasn't something I was actively seeking, but one evening, I met someone who caught my attention. We had an instant connection, and I felt a spark that I hadn't felt in years. But after everything I had been through, I was cautious. I knew I wasn't ready to dive headfirst into another relationship just for the sake of it. I needed to be sure that this was something that aligned with my values, my goals, and the life I had worked so hard to rebuild. I didn't want to make the same mistakes again, and I didn't want to lose myself in another relationship. I took things slowly. We spent time getting to know each other, building a foundation based on trust and mutual respect. I was clear about my boundaries and made sure I wasn't compromising my sense of self. For the first time, I realized that being in a relationship wasn't about filling a void or seeking validation. It was about sharing your life with someone who added value, someone who supported your dreams, not someone who tried to define you. Whether this relationship would turn into something long-term or not didn't matter. What mattered was that I was in control of my own choices, and I wasn't afraid to walk away if things didn't feel right. Before the divorce, I had spent so much of my life seeking validation from others, especially my husband. I thought that if I could be the perfect wife, the perfect partner, then I would be loved and accepted. But after everything that happened, I realized how deeply flawed that thinking had been. I had put my self-worth in the hands of someone else, and when he left, I was left with nothing but a shattered sense of who I was. It took time, but I eventually realized that my worth wasn't determined by anyone else's opinion of me. It wasn't about what I could do for others. It was about who I was at my core. This realization was both liberating and empowering. I stopped seeking approval or validation from anyone, including my ex-husband. I started doing things for myself, not because I needed someone else to recognize them, but because they brought me joy. Whether it was writing, traveling, or just spending time alone in nature, I did it for me. I began to understand that I was enough just as I was. I didn't need anyone's approval to be worthy of love, success, or happiness. That shift in mindset was life-changing. It allowed me to fully embrace my independence, my strengths, and my potential without being dependent on external validation. When my husband and I were married, finances were something we never really discussed in detail. I had always relied on him to handle most of the financial decisions, and I never paid much attention to the intricacies of budgeting, saving, or investing. But after the divorce, I found myself in a position where I had to take charge of my financial future. I realized that if I wanted to secure my independence long-term, I needed to educate myself on how to manage money effectively. So I started reading financial books, taking online courses, and seeking advice from trusted professionals. Gradually, I became more confident in my ability to make smart financial decisions. I started saving consistently, investing in things that would grow my wealth, and planning for my retirement. I no longer saw money as something I had to rely on someone else for. It was now something I controlled. It was empowering to know that I could manage my finances and make decisions that would benefit me in the long run. I felt like I had taken full ownership of my life, not just emotionally, but financially. The future felt a lot less uncertain now that I knew I had the skills to secure my own financial independence. Looking back on everything I had been through, my marriage, the divorce, the heartache, and the eventual rebuilding of my life, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I never would have imagined that something as painful as a divorce could lead to such growth and transformation. At the time, it felt like the end of the world. But now, I saw it as the beginning of something new. The lessons I had learned about self-love, independence, boundaries, and resilience had shaped me into a stronger, more confident woman. I was grateful for every single experience, even the painful ones, because they had led me to this point. That gratitude didn't mean that I wished for things to have been different. It didn't mean I was happy with how everything had turned out, but it meant that I had found peace with it. I had made peace with my past, and in doing so, I had created a future that was entirely my own. And for that, I was deeply thankful. After the divorce, I quickly realized how important it was to have a solid support network. Initially, I felt like I was alone in this new chapter of my life. The pain of the divorce made me feel isolated, and I struggled with the idea of reaching out for help. But slowly, I started reconnecting with friends and family who had been there for me through thick and thin. They reminded me of my worth, and they supported me when I needed it most. They didn't judge me for my past, but instead celebrated my growth and strength. I realized that I wasn't truly alone. I had people who loved me, who cared about me, and who believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. It was during the toughest moments that I leaned on them the most. Whether it was a late-night phone call with a close friend or a weekend visit with family, I learned the power of leaning on others. I also found strength in being vulnerable and allowing myself to accept help. The support network I built wasn't just there to pick me up when I fell. It was there to cheer me on as I rebuilt myself and my life. I learned that true strength doesn't come from doing everything alone. Sometimes it comes from letting others in. In the chaos of my marriage, I had neglected my own needs. I had become so focused on my husband and our life together that I lost sight of what made me happy. After the divorce, I realized that I needed to make myself a priority again. So, I began exploring things I had always enjoyed but had set aside for years. I started painting again, a hobby I had loved in my youth. I took long walks in nature, something that brought me peace and allowed me to clear my mind. I also spent more time reading books that inspired me, watched movies that made me laugh, and enjoyed quiet moments of solitude. At first, it felt odd to carve out time just for me, but over time, I came to realize how important it was. Self-care wasn't just about physical health. It was about nurturing my mental and emotional well-being as well. I learned to listen to my needs and give myself permission to indulge in the things that brought me joy. These small acts of self-care became a cornerstone of my healing process. They allowed me to reconnect with myself and remember that I was worthy of love, attention, and happiness, just as much as anyone else. In the past, I often second-guessed myself. I was scared to make bold decisions, unsure of my own abilities and the consequences of my choices. But after the divorce, I realized that I had the power to shape my own destiny. I no longer had someone to hide behind or lean on for reassurance. I had to trust myself, my instincts, and my own judgment. Slowly but surely, I began making decisions that were true to my values and my vision for my future. One of the most empowering moments came when I made a decision that had once terrified me. I moved to a new city. It was a place I had always wanted to live, but I had always been too scared to take the plunge. I sold my house, packed my things, and started fresh. I didn't have all the answers, but I trusted myself enough to take the leap. That decision opened up a world of new possibilities. It taught me that I was capable of much more than I had ever imagined. The fear that once held me back was now replaced with confidence. I realized that the only way to grow was to face my fears head-on and make bold choices that aligned with my dreams. For years, I had been defined by my role as a wife. It wasn't that I didn't have my own identity, but I had allowed it to be influenced by my relationship. I was always trying to meet my husband's needs, to be the partner he wanted, that I lost sight of who I was outside of our marriage. After the divorce, I had to learn how to rediscover myself, to figure out who I was without being tied to anyone else. It was a journey of self-exploration, and it took time. But slowly, I began to embrace who I was at my core. I wasn't just a wife. I was a woman with dreams, passions, and goals. I learned to stop defining myself by my past. The marriage, the divorce, the pain, I no longer let those things define my worth. I started focusing on the things that made me happy and fulfilled, regardless of how others saw me. I embraced the idea that I was enough just as I was. I didn't need to be anyone else's idea of who I should be. I was whole on my own, and that realization gave me a newfound sense of freedom. It was like shedding an old skin and stepping into a version of myself that was authentic and true. I didn't need to explain myself or seek approval. I was proud of who I had become. One of the most fulfilling things I did after my divorce was start giving back. I realized that the pain I had gone through wasn't just mine. It was something many people experienced. I had learned so much from my own journey, and I wanted to use my experiences to help others who were facing similar struggles. I began volunteering at a local women's shelter, offering support to those who were going through difficult times in their relationships. I shared my story, listened to theirs, and offered advice when I could. It felt so good to know that I was making a difference in someone else's life. Helping others not only gave me a sense of purpose, but it also reminded me of how far I had come. Every time I shared my story with someone, I felt empowered all over again. It was like my experiences had a greater meaning, that my healing journey wasn't just for me. It was also for others. I was able to show others that they, too, could overcome their struggles and rebuild their lives. It became a way for me to take my pain and turn it into something beautiful, something that could help others on their own path to healing. The final piece of my healing journey came when I learned to forgive, not just my ex-husband, but myself as well. For so long, I carried around guilt and resentment. I blamed myself for the failure of our marriage, for not seeing the signs, for letting things go on as long as they did. But as time passed, I realized that holding on to that pain wasn't helping anyone, especially not me. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened, but about letting go of the hold it had on me. I forgave my ex-husband for the hurt he caused, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I also forgave myself for the mistakes I had made. I accepted that I wasn't perfect, that I had made choices based on the best information I had at the time. The moment I let go of the anger and guilt, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was like I had been carrying a backpack full of rocks, and suddenly, I was free of it. Forgiveness allowed me to move forward with love and compassion toward myself and others. I realized that peace didn't come from external circumstances. It came from within. After the divorce, one of the most important things I wanted to focus on was my financial independence. For years, I had relied on my husband for financial stability. Now, I had to learn how to manage my own finances, which was both liberating and intimidating. I started by educating myself on basic financial concepts: budgeting, saving, and investing. I read books, watched videos, and even sought advice from financial advisors. Slowly but surely, I gained confidence in handling money, and I began setting goals for my financial future. I realized that being financially independent meant more than just paying my bills. It meant building a future that I could control. I opened investment accounts, started saving for retirement, and even began planning for long-term goals like buying my own home. As I made these financial moves, I felt more empowered. It wasn't just about money. It was about taking control of my life and ensuring I had the resources to live the life I wanted. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come in terms of financial literacy and security. The financial freedom I have now is something I'm deeply proud of. It's a testament to the hard work and dedication I put into rebuilding my life after the divorce. Trust had been broken in my marriage, and after the divorce, it was something I struggled to rebuild, both with others and within myself. For a long time, I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to trust someone else again, let alone let them get close enough to hurt me. I spent a lot of time reflecting on the mistakes in my marriage and understanding how I had allowed certain things to happen. I realized that trust wasn't just about the other person. It was about being able to trust my own instincts and decisions. It took time, but I eventually came to the conclusion that I had to heal first before I could open my heart to anyone else. Only after taking that time did I start to realize that love and trust didn't have to be synonymous with pain and betrayal. I began to slowly rebuild my trust in people, not just in romantic relationships, but in friendships and other aspects of my life. I learned that trust could be earned, and that not everyone would hurt me the way my ex-husband did. I met new people, made new friends, and learned to embrace vulnerability again. I began to believe that healthy, trusting relationships were possible, but only if I first trusted myself and my ability to make better choices. Once I had taken the time to heal and rebuild my life, I started to think about the possibility of romance again. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I realized that I deserved love just as much as anyone else. I met a few people along the way, and while some relationships were brief, others allowed me to explore what I really wanted in a partner. I learned that love didn't have to come with compromises or sacrificing who I was. It was about finding someone who appreciated me for who I truly was, someone who respected my independence and supported my dreams. When I finally met someone who felt like the right fit, it was different from anything I had experienced before. This time, I was in control of the relationship. I wasn't afraid to communicate my needs, to express my desires, or to set boundaries. I didn't settle for less than what I deserved. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in a relationship where both of us were equals, where love was built on mutual respect and understanding. It wasn't about filling a void or trying to fix something broken. It was about sharing life together as two whole, independent people. After the divorce, I realized that my relationships with my family had also been affected. For so long, I had focused on keeping up appearances for the sake of my marriage. But now, I had the freedom to redefine what family meant to me. I began to rebuild healthier dynamics with my parents, siblings, and extended family. I spent more time with them, listening to their concerns, sharing my own struggles, and allowing for honest conversations. This new chapter in my life helped me understand that family wasn't just about being related by blood. It was about genuine connection and support. I also learned to set boundaries with family members who had been overly critical or unsupportive in the past. I realized that my well-being had to come first, even if it meant standing up to those I loved. In doing so, I created stronger, more fulfilling relationships. My family and I were no longer bound by expectations or obligations. Instead, we supported one another in a way that felt real and healthy. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I felt more at peace knowing that I could be myself around my family, and they could be their true selves around me, without the pressures of maintaining an idealized family image. One of the most fulfilling aspects of my post-divorce life was the chance to embrace new challenges. I had spent so many years focused on the needs of others that I had forgotten about my own personal growth. After the divorce, I made a conscious decision to challenge myself in new ways. I enrolled in courses to learn new skills, picked up hobbies I had always been curious about and pushed myself outside of my comfort zone. Whether it was traveling solo to a foreign country, starting a new career path, or simply trying something new, I became committed to growing as an individual. Embracing challenges allowed me to discover new strengths within myself. It taught me that I was capable of more than I had ever imagined. The fear of failure that once held me back no longer had power over me. Instead, I viewed challenges as opportunities for growth. Each challenge I took on, no matter how small, gave me confidence and a deeper sense of fulfillment. I realized that personal growth wasn't just about achieving success. It was about learning from the journey and becoming a better version of myself along the way. Looking back on my journey, I feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The divorce was painful, but it also gave me the freedom to rebuild my life on my own terms. I am no longer defined by my past or my relationship with my ex-husband. I have learned to embrace my own power, trust in my decisions, and pursue my dreams with confidence. The future now feels full of endless possibilities, and I am excited for what's to come. I no longer fear change or uncertainty. I welcome it. The freedom I have now is something I cherish deeply. I'm no longer bound by someone else's expectations or needs. I am free to live the life I want, to follow my passions, and to create a future that aligns with my values. Each day feels like a new opportunity to grow, to love, and to live fully. I've learned that no matter how difficult life gets, there's always a chance to rebuild, to find happiness, and to create a future full of hope.